the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess from Cardswire.com, the USA Today NFL wire site that covers the Arizona Cardinals. Normally, we would have Seth Cox as the co-host. However, it is his birthday week, and he is out of town, and it's the holiday. So we have a special guest with us, a guy that you've probably read, and he's been one of our co-hosts, I believe, once a couple years ago. Alex Sutton, one of my contributors on Cardswire.com. Alex, welcome to the show again. Thanks for coming on. Too bad it's when this is the it's a crap show. This season has been a crap show. And listeners, you guys, you know me. You know me in terms of how I view this. This team's it's crap. It's hopeless. I don't think they're winning again. If they win again, why? But yeah, so welcome, Alex. And he will give his thoughts on a lot of things, you know, and Alex has some strong words about a lot of things about this season. I've had to pull him off of the edge many times this season from our text message conversations. But yeah, there's not much positive to talk about because the crap show continues for the Cardinals, starting with general manager Steve Keim. We're going to be talking about in this episode, we'll talk about Steve Keim, his absence, whether they should move on, how they should move on. We'll talk about Kliff Kingsbury in his future, look at the good and the bad from the game against the Denver Broncos, and then lamentably preview and predict the game of Christmas night against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, where it might be Trace McSorley starting at quarterback. Aren't we all excited? Hooray, Christmas. Trace McSorley. So let's go ahead and get started. So we know in this last week, the big news surrounding the team was this, is that general manager Steve Keim, the Cardinals, announced a leave of absence, a medical issue. It's a health-related leave of absence, but they didn't say anything else. Since then, there have been bits and pieces, and his return seems very much in doubt. Ian Rappaport used the word indefinite and then talked about in a couple of days after the announcement that it has been a long time coming. It's been an ongoing situation for the last several weeks and months, which kind of raises eyebrows. But again, the one thing that stood out was how the Cardinals had no comment about it, other than that it was medical, it was health related, and that for legal and privacy reasons, they have nothing else to say. So let's start just on the reaction. What were your initial reactions to the news of his leave of absence?
Well, yeah, first off, thank you for having me. And I'd like to point out that the list of topics for today, none of them were positive. So that was definitely something to prepare for. But yeah, I mean, my initial reaction was a nice hold his hand out the door for what is his really good friend, and then leaving the organization. Now, at first, if we're talking like breaking news, like got the notification on Twitter, I thought, oh man, maybe, you know, this is like a very serious health condition where, you know, something pops up later where like there's like the breaking news scoop, and then like they'll later go into detail about maybe what is actually going on. And so kind of as you pointed out that they didn't say anything and how it continued into this point is still nothing. That's where I kind of lean towards, all right, I think, you know, this is the last that we see as Steve as general manager of the Cardinals. And, you know, whereas we all wish him the best off the field and whatever health stuff he's dealing with, I would be very shocked if he does come back. I think, as we all know, this would be hard, or it was always going to be hard for Mr. Bidwell to fire his old buddy Keim. But I mean, I think this is the nicest way it's going to happen. And you know, with their fan attendance, I don't know if you've gone on SeatGeek or anything and looked at ticket prices for fun and just how many are available. I think you'd be really hard pressed to sell that back to your fans if you bring Keim back. Also, just the record, but the off the field stuff too.
It's been such a mess so far. My initial reaction, and I found it very interesting that when you have a health related thing, how nothing about his health came out. Because anytime someone someone notable in the public eye went within a sports organization, whether it be General Manager Mike Hazen, whether it be the team president there for the Diamondbacks, or Bruce Arians, or you always, if there's something health related, something about that health comes out. Heck, even J.J. Watt, which he was very upset about, his heart condition, that managed to get out. This has been so tight-lipped, which makes me think, and this was my initial reaction. Now, there is some anecdotal evidence to this, but it probably, for me, my initial reaction, it probably wasn't so much as illness-related as sort of disease or something debilitating, but rather something that does affect the health. My first initial thing, that when my group chat with Seth and Johnny and Blake, guys who we all know from PHNX, Cards Wire, Revenge of the Birds, all of that, is that it could be rehab. That would be health related, and it kind of is on brand. It would make sense. He had the DUI a few years ago. There's anecdotal evidence out there as to continued issues with that, and it will also tie in nicely with the notion that Rappaport gave, that it's been an ongoing situation for weeks and months, where if it were affecting his job performance and things of the like, where that could be a sort of an induced, required, insisted upon health related or health related leave of absence, and that it could lead to his dismissal ultimately. And it'd be interesting to see whether, if in fact he is dismissed, if it would be one of those cases where it's considered with cause. Obviously, we just went through the whole Sean Kugler scenario where, he had the incident in Mexico, allegedly groping a woman at a hotel. He's dismissed, and now that was kind of other news, is that there's arbitration being requested. He says that it wasn't me, it wasn't him, I don't do that. And that there's evidence otherwise, there's eyewitness and video that says otherwise. But this is just, and honestly, when this came out, it was just another thing. Like, the calendar, the 2022 calendar year for the Cardinals has just been one hit after another, beginning with the playoff loss, that it started with that disastrous playoff loss to the Rams. Then you go to the Chris Mortensen report about Kyler Murray and his leadership and this and that came from the front office, to the manifesto, scrubbing social media, then the extensions, then you got it seems like every 2 to 3 weeks, at least once a month, there is something gross. Like, you can describe it, it's just, ugh. Like, it makes you want to vomit. It's in terms of a sports fan, it's all the wrong things that just continue to happen every single month this year. The season was doomed from the beginning. This team that I felt was a talented enough team, they can't get out of their way. There's just something in the way every single time, whether it's happening to them or they're doing it to themselves. To the tragedy of one of the cornerbacks that they're really excited about, Jeff Gladney, tragically dies in a car accident, and it's just, it doesn't. Everything has gone wrong. Injuries, poor performance, mistakes. Coaches getting fired, coaches having issues off the field, and now the general manager. It's just, what's next? That's kind of my whole thing, is what's next. And honestly, this might be, we've all wondered if Michael Bidwill would have the ability, obviously he has the ability, would have the heart to let Keim go. Because if there's one thing that we've seen over the years, he and Keim are tight. They are very close. In addition to being close professionally, they are close personally. And so that was going to always be a hard thing for him to do. But if this is what's going to cause that. Whatever it is that is ailing Keim, on the human level, please get better for yourself, for your family, for your friends. But if this leads to his dismissal and changing some things within the Cardinals organization, I don't think that's a negative, don't you?
No, I mean, of course, we, as you said, we wish for the best for him and his family off the field. But this, assuming everything does work out for him off the field as well, I mean, there is no. Some people have coined this as an opportunity, because it almost seemed impossible that Keim would be fired even after getting a DUI and then going 3-13 with the historically bad offense, and the kind of the duality of Michael Floyd getting cut like the 2 years prior for the DUI, and then him not getting that, and just players coming at him, and it was one thing after the next. And I think he kind of bought himself a good 2 or 3 years with the DeAndre Hopkins trade, which all-timer, by the way, always have a special place in my heart for Steve for that one. But this is an opportunity to move on, because you would have to, I think at this point, make an active effort to bring him back. Whereas, I don't know, to me, it kind of feels like he's already out the door. There was a report that Arizona Sports was writing about earlier this week that Michael was very active at one of the minority accelerator program at the NFL owners meeting in Dallas, about just people who are qualified to either be front office workers high level, or are in the works of doing so. I think that assuming that's true, and I think that would be a hard one to fake, because there's a lot of people at those meetings. I think that tells you all you need to know. And maybe he's just covering all his bases. But not only is he looking at these outside candidates, talking to other owners, clearly maybe, there's people who are qualified to be general managers at very successful organizations, but haven't got the chance because it's a successful organization. So there's those. And then as we discussed off the air, you have two, very qualified general manager candidates, both of which have got interviews. And I think when you just piece all that together, you have the opportunity to eliminate a lot of the negatives. Granted, there, like you said, there was a lot that was not out of their, or that was out of their control this year. But I think bringing in that new face is what they need at this point. Keim's had his up and downs with his tenure, but there have been consistent position groups that has been unable to address throughout his entire tenure, regardless of how good they were, and constant bashing and people saying that there's a lack of professionalism. And I think whether it's an outside or as we also discussed, one of your two internal candidates, I think you can get someone who demands a very high level of respect, and then that really helps you just your organization as a whole.
Coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web, we're going to talk up more about that. How should the Cardinals move on, if in fact they move on from Steve Keim? That's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web, and we're going to go with the assumption. This is for anything else. We're just going to go with the assumption that they do move on from general manager Steve Keim. Right now, they have two very qualified in-house candidates. They've got Adrian Wilson and Quentin Harris, both of whom have vice president titles over player personnel and pro personnel. Both have been, Adrian Wilson has been given more of the fast track ever since he rejoined the organization as executive to a scout, to basically doing a little bit of everything, then over pro personnel, then he got the VP. Quentin Harris has kind of been the right-hand man for Steve Keim since after McDonough kind of was moved quietly into a more general executive position. Quentin Harris, for the past several seasons, has been the right-hand man for Steve Keim. And so, you've got two very, very different, very qualified minority candidates to come in. And so you kind of want to know, okay, what makes sense? Do we just promote from within, or should we do something more outside? Because if we look at over the last several general managers, I'm going to go back in time. So before Steve Keim was Rod Graves. Rod Graves had been the general manager since 2003. Now, Steve Keim, he was a guy that was brought up through the organization. He was promoted from within. The same applied to Rod Graves. Now, Rod Graves did not do his entire career with the Cardinals. He was with the Chicago Bears as a scout. In 1997, he became vice president of football operations for the Cardinals, and then 2003, I think it was, that he took over. 2002, 2003, he took over as general manager. Bob Ferguson was before him. I need to check on that. That's the name I forgot about who was the general manager for the Cardinals. I need to see where he began in his career.
That is before my football consciousness, so you're on your own on that one.
Yeah, I'm trying to whether he was internal. Bob Ferguson, general manager. He was also promoted from within. So
shocker.
He was brought up within the organization. He was the VP of player personnel in the 90s, and he was promoted to general manager in 1999. He replaced Larry Wilson. Larry Wilson, an all-time great for the Cardinals, Hall of Famer. So he was general manager up through 1993. And there was another guy between Larry Wilson, who was the Cardinals. So let's go 98 Cardinals. Who was the general manager? Oh, they didn't have a general manager. Oh, okay. That's how they did it. That's why. They didn't technically have a general manager from after Larry Wilson until Bob Ferguson. He was the vice president of player personnel, but basically ran the organization like that. And so if we go back, dating back to Larry Wilson, Steve Keim, Rod Graves, Bob Ferguson, Larry Wilson. That takes us to before Arizona. So the entire Arizona Cardinals history, the history of the Cardinals within the state of Arizona, they have never gone outside the organization to bring in a general manager. It has always been an internal hire, a guy that's been promoted and worked his way up. The question is, while it makes perfect sense to either promote Harris or Wilson, with Wilson probably, while Harris probably is the most qualified, Wilson seems to be the one that's been prepared most recently to do it and would be following the kind of the career arc of another Wilson and Larry Wilson, who was a Hall of Fame player, coached the team, worked his way up through the executive levels to become general manager. And so that would seem like the no-brainer thing to do, right, Alex? It seems like that's the no-brainer thing to do. It's what the Cardinals have always done. They have two very qualified candidates within, but do they need something more?
Yeah, I'm going to say this with absolutely zero inside knowledge of, whether obviously they're working together right now as interim, but it's certainly, got to be some sort of competition in there because only one will be the general manager. And since they both gotten interviews, you got to figure that when you promote one, if you do,
you're going to lose the other.
The other will eventually leave at some point. Yeah. So because you're signing a 5-year contract, you need to operate under that. But I think, again, with no inside knowledge, I think if you're promoting from within, it's Adrian Wilson. He has very, very quickly moved up the ranks. I felt like every every other year there was, some tweet sent out by the Cardinals PR that, oh, Adrian Wilson and a new cool title. And then all the way up to, as you said, Keim's right-hand man. And, I think when you look at the overall perception of the Cardinals this season, which has been very, very negative for usually very valid reasons, I think a Hall of Fame safety, would really, really do wonders for them in terms of when it's not a good look for your team when players are consistently bashing your front office, because those players talk to said other players who may happen to be free agents or something along those lines. And so when you get someone who would demand a high level of respect, which has been clearly lacking the last couple of years, I think that, as you said, is the no-brainer move. I did, and I'll switch this up a little bit from talking off air. I used to think that, yes, let's bring someone outside, not so much because of the on-field play this year, but just the amount of just cringeworthy, gut-wrenching things that have happened. I initially thought, let's bring in someone from the outside, someone from or the Ravens or the Steelers, or one of these year in and year out organizations that is well run. And I'll switch it a little bit. I think that would be a very good idea, just because of the off the field issues. But I think what you can also do is make Wilson your guy, because that clearly seems to be the way this is headed. And then bring in other maybe lower level organization members from, like I said, the Ravens, Steelers, Pats, organizations like that, to be promoted in the future. But at the very least, I do think you need to bring in some outside personnel, outside front office members, because clearly, what's been going on up there, this has not worked this year. So whether it's an outside general manager or it's an outside assistant general manager, something along those lines, I think this organization needs some accountability. And what better way than to, realize, okay, this has not been how we hoped this season had gone. Let's look for what other people may have to offer us to help. I think that can only do.
Considering the mess, I would not. I think it would be a little bit disappointing. However, if they didn't go stay in house, but there is something to changing things up for this organization. That there's something. It feels like there's something rotten happening right now, and I'm not going to say that that's Michael Bidwell's fault, but I think it's just the series of events requires some other change. That said, I wonder if let me throw this out there. If they do move on for Keim and they don't want to lose either Wilson or Harris, if they kind of continue with both because and looking back with the Bob Ferguson, they went from 93 to 97 without technically anyone with the general manager position, meaning potentially they could do the same thing where Harris and Wilson are the guys moving forward working together. And then that way you don't lose either one. But if one gets a job elsewhere, it becomes very easy to have the other one take over. So I'm gonna leave that out there for the moment, knowing that because I didn't know this. I didn't know that they didn't have a general manager during that time. From 94 to 97, they didn't have a general manager. They had Bob Ferguson, who was running things as the VP of player personnel, and I think it was a case where Bill Bidwell. I don't remember this because this was the 90s and I was a teenager. Once Larry Wilson retired, they didn't know what direction they wanted to go, and so they just let Ferguson, who was his VP, promoted him to kind of take over, and then he became the general manager. Then we moved on to Ferguson. Then it was Rod Graves, and then after Rod Graves, it was Keim, and now kind of the same position. I'm not going to close the door on the possibility that they do the same thing again, where I don't know if you're going to give them co-presidents or president over the kind of the same title. Probably one's VP of player personnel and one is VP of pro personnel. Those kind of sound like the same thing, don't they?
They do, and I think that is certainly something that can't be totally taken off the table. But I would be disappointed. I think you pick your guy and then you shake hands with the other one and say good luck at wherever
That
your
makes
next
sense. That makes
general
sense.
manager
I do
role
think
is.
either one of those players, former players, if there's one thing that would be able to change is that there's one thing we know about Steve Keim. He understands that the general manager position, you kind of have to be heartless, you have to have thick skin. But if there's one thing that we've learned over the course of several years, he rubbed players the wrong way. And that became very evident sometimes when they were within the organization and once they left the organization. Things like he never, like, he I guess he didn't have to. He didn't have to tell Patrick Peterson that they weren't going to re-sign him. But why wouldn't you? The guy's been with the team when you've been with the team for a decade. Why wouldn't you communicate that? And it's just player after player after player after player. And I think the one thing that would change, because Keim he never played professional football. His playing career ended in college. You get two guys who were Quentin Harris, who spent many years in the league, and Adrian Wilson, who was one of the greats in the league. Borderline, like, you can make a case that he's a Hall of Famer. Both of those players will be able to come in with a cachet of respect and know how to treat players as players, would understand the kind of mindset. And so I think that's one of the things that will be one of the most positive things if one of those takes over, is because one thing players always resonates with players is former players. And it's not necessarily that you have to be a former player to be a good coach or go be a good executive. But if you were a good player and you played lots of years in the league, they understand you. That resonates because they understand you. You are one of them, and you're not just an outsider. You are one of them. And I think that will, I think that'll make sense. And I think, assuming that that's what they're going to do, I think that's what will happen is one of two things. They'll promote one of them, or they try and run it with both, which would be an interesting approach, honestly.
I mean, what if you're sitting in the war room and you're on the clock and you're still arguing with the other general manager about what the pick is? But no, I mean, obviously they'd come to some agreement. But I can't rule that out either. But I think you need to pick one because this organization has been anything but stable. And I think having two general managers can kind of lead to just naturally, I think it could lead to a lot of disagreements. I mean, if two people sharing the same title, trying to make, unless you share the same vision, then maybe that's possible. But, I think you can look across the division, or I guess look above you in the division in the Niners. John Lynch, Hall of Fame safety. Adrian might make the Hall of Fame some point. But John Lynch, at least on defense, knows what he's doing. And he there's no matter how bad the Niners were, and they were really bad multiple times this decade, there was always, and I know a lot of that's like historical relevance, from the 80s and 90s, but there's always a level of respect around the organization. Players want to play in San Francisco. And I think if anything's been an issue with the Cardinals under Keim, it has been the defense, right? He's spent a lot. We've had two just incredible offenses in first half of last year. The Palmer BA era from 2014 to early 2016. But I mean, defense just has never felt like it got the attention it needed. And Pat would tell you that. Tyron has said that. And granted, we know they don't like Steve in the first place, but I think you would see a total culture shift defensively with Wilson, and the organization seems to know how to get their star receivers, their star running backs. And maybe a lot of that's a credit to Steve, but I'm going to get a little too far on the field here, but I think you take one of these players, and if there's anything that the Cardinals have struggled with also, well, there's many things. Free agency, it never feels like they get their guy in free agency outside of a trade. Maybe JJ Watt, I'll give him that one. But maybe something of that has to do with former and current players telling other, like, the world, and I'm sure their friends, how, like, much they feel disrespected by Keim and the organization. Does that get better under a former player? I think it might.
Coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, special of Cardinals Talk on the Web, let's talk about the future of Kliff Kingsbury. What do we have to look forward to with that? That's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best of Cardinals Talk on the Web. Kliff Kingsbury's future is very much in doubt if the future of Steve Keim is in doubt, especially considering just everything around the team. It's been a mess on the field, off the field, and it would make sense. It will make sense to move on. If you're going to lose the general manager, you have a new general manager come in, hire the guy that he wants. Who knows? Let's talk about the pros and cons of firing Kliff. What, to you, would be the biggest reason why? What would be the biggest benefit for firing Kliff, along with kind of cleaning house?
I think just that, cleaning house. I think this organization needs a full reset, and whereas I think that there are better coaching candidates that may be available to the Cardinals, like a Sean Payton, who are proven winners, whereas Kliff Kingsbury isn't. And I will say that, for all of Kliff's faults, he really does not deserve what has been thrown at him this season. His organization failed him, I would say, and injuries ran crazy, things that were out of his control. But I think if you're going to go full reset with Keim, I think the major pro is getting a coach that really demands outside respect. And then not that you need to care so much, with media outlets or people on, Twitter general managers have to say. But I think that there's a perception, there always has been with Kliff and Keim, even when they were 10-2, that it's just a poorly run organization, and there's just no respect for the organization, I think. And there's definitely, as we'll get into, some cons, right? He's a total players coach, and players have shown that they would like to play for Kliff.
And there's a lot to say about that, because they do respect his work ethic. He never criticizes his players.
Right.
And so there's a lot to like about him. He is well liked. I don't know how much they respect his scheme or coaching, and I don't know how much that it might be just because on-field performance, this and that. Yeah, I think the biggest pro is that if you want this team, if you basically just want to wipe the team clean of this season, and this happened in 2018. They literally. When they cleaned house, they basically fired all the coaches, any player, even like their most productive players. Josh Bynes, who had a fantastic year, Trey Boston, who played very well. They got rid of everybody. They just tried to completely rid themselves of the stench of 2018.
I think they fired the social media team too.
And so they really kind of just cleaned house. And it makes sense to do that. There are some cons though, and that is it is majorly in part of the situation with Kyler Murray moving forward. Now tearing his ACL, he's not going to be able to work out in the offseason. He's not going to get any OTA reps, training camp reps, likely, and he's likely going to miss the first part of the season. When you bring in a new coach and a new scheme, one, you don't know what you're going to get out of Kyler, and then you're going to have him coming up in offseason where he does not know the system. And then you come in, Colt McCoy, who, maybe he's not the quarterback that the guy wants as the coach, but Colt McCoy's contract has more than, I think it's $2.25 million of his salary is fully guaranteed. So unless he is walking away and retiring, the Cardinals are kind of tied to that guy because his salary, he has a good chunk of that. That was when he brought him back. They gave him a 2-year deal that was almost all guaranteed. And so unless you don't want to go with Colt McCoy to start the season, I can understand why you wouldn't want to start with Colt McCoy as your starter. He's a capable backup, but he is very limited. He's very limited what you can do with him, and he can't do anything to help your team when you're off schedule or behind. And so there are some cons. This team was built kind of around Kliff's expertise. They built an offense. They built an offensive unit based on skill and ability, and that hasn't worked out this year. But then you're going to kind of have to remake the roster. I think there are some pros as well. There's a lot to be said about how Kyler Murray is as a player with responding to coaching. I do not believe Kyler will have any trouble responding to coaching. And I think if they brought in a new coach, especially one that had a level of respect, like a veteran coach that coached hard, I think Kyler would be perfectly fine. In fact, I believe with perhaps some of the perceived issues that there are with him are because Kliff doesn't coach him hard enough. I think that might be one of the reasons, is because he has a little bit of freedom, that he tries to do more than he should. And perhaps a harder coach would get the response that they want and kind of rein him in, so to say, if we're going to, and kind of direct him a little bit better. And I think that would be the case. And so there are lots of reasons why you would keep and move on. Because if there's one thing you can't blame Kliff for many of the problems the Cardinals had, because of how the roster's structured. However, you also look, and then no matter how much what he's talking about in practice, they're not translating the practice stuff onto the field. They are one of the least disciplined teams. I believe this. They said during the broadcast on Sunday that they are the most penalized offense in the NFL. And offense is Kingsbury's thing. And you'd add that on top of that, and you have the late season blues that they have every single year. I personally like Kliff Kingsbury as a head coach, but the mess that he's been given, the situation he's in, it's a bad look for the organization either way, because if you keep him, the fans have no respect for the organization until things turn around. Or two, you let him go, you look like a moron. You look like a bunch of idiots as an organization, because you literally just gave this guy a 5-year contract extension. So his extension hasn't even begun, technically, and you already fired him.
Yep.
It makes it look like a clown show, basically. But this, honestly, it's been a clown show this year.
Well, it is. It is. I think you hit it spot on with Kliff. I do feel bad for a lot of the things that he's had to deal with, and I think the biggest thing is some people, just looking throughout Cardinals social media are like, oh, I mean, we want all these top tier head coaches, Sean Payton, Jim Harbaugh, even as Ben brought up, these winning coaches to help kind of reset the culture. And they're like, but I don't know if they would want to play or coach the Cardinals because of how big of a mess this is. And look, Michael Bidwell can pick up his phone in his office and find out if Sean Payton and or Jim Harbaugh would be interested in the job. I know that you're technically not supposed to do that with, a head coach still on the roster, but we'd be kidding ourselves if we think that things like that don't happen. Bidwell, if he wants to court a guy like Sean Payton, and obviously that's who every Cardinals fan you talk to wants. I think that's a home run hire for the organization. And, whereas a lot of those things that have happened aren't Kliff's fault, I don't think anyone can say that Sean Payton isn't an upgrade right now, just with past success. Or, Jim Harbaugh's been away a bit, but in terms of these guys that aren't currently coaching, like a D'Amico Ryans getting ready for a playoff run, like Michael can find out if these guys would be at least interested in playing for the organization. And if both of them or a list of your candidates are all coming back, no, then I think you do keep Kliff. And because that Kyler injury really, I mean, it was already bad, but there was optimism for a turnaround, a quick turnaround. And then that was the one thing that you just could not have had happen. And that does make bringing Kliff back a bit more attractive. But just, just to sum it, Bidwell can find out. And if you do keep Kliff, I think you need to bring in some veteran help on the roster, maybe an offensive coordinator, right? Not a guy who's going to call plays, but, Jim Caldwell's been thrown out a bunch of times. Just if Kliff is calling the plays, he needs help. I think we've gotten to the point where he needs help, because the same struggles that Kliff has always had are continuing here in year 4. So, but yeah, I mean, there's upgrades out there, but they might not be interested.
Coming up next on the Rise Up Sierra podcast, Special Our Cardinals Talk on the Web, more kind of disappointing stuff. Let's talk about the loss to the Denver Broncos. the good and the bad. That's coming next on Rise Up, See Red. We're back on the Rise Up, See Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. The good and the bad from the game against the Denver Broncos, a 24-15 loss. That it went from a 9-3 lead to a 24-9 deficit, and then they picked up a garbage time touchdown, which, breathed maybe just a little bit of life into them. But there wasn't much to like about that game because, one, Colt McCoy started. Offensively, both teams were kind of garbage. But let's talk about the good first. For you, what were any good things that came out of that game?
J.J. Watt, and that tops the short list. Good for the future. That's very much in question. We don't know his status of playing further beyond. I definitely liked what I saw out of Mijay Sanders. I think that they're between their 2 third-round rookies that I know you were very high on when those picks were made, and I was texting you, who are these people? I think that there is certainly some optimism there for at least one of them to become, a long-term contributor. I love seeing, Budda Baker get a pick, just guys like that. But outside of that, Trey McBride, another young guy, that made some plays.
He looked better because after most of the season where every time that he shows up, it's a mistake, he's made some plays the past couple of weeks.
Yeah, he certainly has, but I mean, outside of that, there's
the pass rush was good.
Much to like.
The pass rush was good. 7 sacks. I'll granted the problem was 6 of them came in the first half. Second half, garbage. That's part of the negative. But 6 sacks in the first half. So you got 3 from JJ. You got 1 from IJ Sanders. You got 1 for Jonathan Ledbetter. You got 1 from Tristan Hill. And then you also got 1 from Marcus Golden. And so the pass rush in the first half was fantastic. In fact, the defensive play in the first half was pretty good. But again, that was also against a team that is absolutely atrocious offensively. And that, other than, then we'll say this. I know we are in tank mode right now. It hurts my heart to kind of do that. But I guess another good thing is that they now they have a top 5 pick in the draft, and
they do.
They have a top 5 pick in the draft, and they could move up and maybe as high, like probably reasonable is the 3rd pick if they, because I don't think they're going to win again the rest of the year. But they have the same record as 2 other teams ahead of them that are ahead of them, but they have the strongest schedule. So. If they just win a game, the Cardinals move up. The Bears are going to be hard to get higher than, and definitely the Texans. It's the Texans.
They're locked. They're locked into
here's
one,
the thing
for sure.
with the Texans, though. They're a good kind of bad, right?
Yeah.
You look at the way they play. They lose every stinking week, but they're kind of competitive. And so that's kind of the best kind of bad. Not like the bad that the Cardinals were in 2018, because that was
blown out every week.
There we had no hope. Houston has no hope, but plays like they do. And so we're probably the best pick. I think the Cardinals can likely expect to get is about the 3rd pick. But I don't think the Cardinals. But so that is a good thing. But let's go to the dark side. And what was bad about that game?
Just about everything else. I think it was a little surprising to see some uncharacteristic, airmails by Colt McCoy. Just looked out of rhythm. If you can, even when
Colt
the
McCoy
offense has
poorly. Now, granted, Denver's defense is pretty solid, but
it is.
And for all of you, there's a particular writer from a particular site that has been kind of calling for Colt McCoy to be the start. Like, no, please stop. Please stop. Colt McCoy is only good when they are on schedule. He cannot rally you, and he is very limited. And if you have a good defense that's going to take away your first read and literally keep you from, only allow you to dink and dunk and dink and dunk. And I sort of predicted it last week. I'm like, Colt McCoy, the way he's built frame-wise, he can't take a punishment. He will get hurt. And what happened? He got hurt. That's another bad thing. We had to watch Trace McSorley play the rest of the game.
And you will on Christmas.
Yes, and it looks like, because of concussion protocol, is probably going to be Trace McSorley again. Now, good for Trace McSorley. This is great for his career. I don't think there is anyone who wants to see him starting a football game outside of his family, friends, and former coaches.
And he has a song on TikTok. So
right,
those people,
right. Maybe some Penn State fan somewhere. I don't know. But let's be honest. This is it. They played poorly offensively. They played atrociously defensively. They couldn't stop the run. They turned the ball over, and they were undisciplined with penalties. That was as bad a performance as you could get. They were bad on every phase. It's just that they went from being pretty all right defensively in the first half to atrocious, and that's been an ongoing problem. They gave up 21 unanswered points to the Broncos. They gave up 20 unanswered points to the Patriots the week before. The Chargers game was close the whole game, and they came back and won. But the 49ers game was a crap show as well. The defense, they played pretty solidly for about a quarter and a half, maybe a half, and then they're done. They're gassed because the offense can't do anything, and the other team knows what they can do, and they just do it. And so, once again, we're in a situation where the offense is poor, and then the defense gets gashed.
Yeah, and we don't love rooting for losses, but I'll certainly say that just paying attention to Cardinals social media, I mean, you have diehard Cardinals fans actively rooting for Latavius Murray in his mile wide rushing lanes that he had in the second half. And so I would like to point this out, little off topic from the Broncos game. When we were talking about draft order, you have the Bears, who left have the Bills, Lions, and Vikings. I don't think you can expect a win there, but a big one for the Tankathon, for your 1:30 p.m. Christmas Day enjoyment, is Broncos Rams. You would think you'd want the Rams to secure that one, because if I'd rather have Detroit in front of us than Seattle, I'll tell you that much. We do not need Seattle picking up a Will Anderson or a Jalen Carter. But yeah, so we will be tuning back into Broncos football I guess we're forced to. It's on Christmas Day.
It's
but
the only game on then.
It is, and we are at that point. I told you this off air, but I was at Disneyland with some family, and my brother-in-law is a huge Broncos fan, and we would be in line watching it on my phone and Sunday Ticket, and both just laughing. Just the field goal, missed field goal, and just the offensive ineptitude. And if there's anything I can say about all that, it's got to be extremely difficult for the players, and especially for Kliff Kingsbury, to come into the office for 3 more weeks and try to get some life out of the team, because they, like it or not, they have a national TV game, as we'll get into next. But you'd like to not get embarrassed again on prime time, but I think that we are certainly headed that way, which we'll go over.
Yes. Coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk. That's exactly what we're going to talk about. We're going to preview, predict Week 16, Christmas night, Tampa Bay Buccaneers in town, Tom Brady against the Cardinals. Let's talk about it. That's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. Cardinals play the Buccaneers this weekend. The Buccaneers are 6-8 and yet lead the NFC South. What a mess. The Cardinals are 4-10. They've lost 4 in a row in 6 of their last 7 games. It's a lost season. Trace McSorley's probably starting at quarterback. And Tampa's got a really good defense. Their defense is very good. They're not great at stopping the run. And they're no good offensively. But it doesn't matter. Even a Broncos team, which is no good offensively, managed to put up 3 second-half touchdowns against them. So there's not much to be excited about this week, is there?
No, and unfortunately, it is on Christmas. So if you have any family that and everyone knows you're a Cardinals fan, that's a little bit tough. But I think your blueprint for this game, if I was a betting man, which I guess I am,
Alex is a degenerate, guys.
Yes, quite so. I think you're looking at something similar where the defense in the first half, kind of like with the Patriots game and then last week against the Broncos, holds up against what has been a really, really bad passing offense. But I don't see the Cardinals offense being able to do much against Todd Bowles and company, who are historically Todd Bowles defenses are good at stopping the run. And if the only way the Cardinals are going to get anything going offensively is if they have a really nice rushing day from James Conner, which we saw against the Patriots, and things were going okay. And then late in the Broncos game when they were able to finally put together a drive. But I think everyone likes to clown on the Bucs passing offense right now, but it's still Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, and I'm not sure that we're going to have any of our top 3 cornerbacks to be able to slow
we
either
might
of them down.
have Antonio Hamilton and Marco Wilson back, but
Maybe.
there is some hope. Is that the Tampa Bay Bucks? They give up over 120 yards per game defense rushing wise. They allow 120.2 yards on the ground per game, and so perhaps if there's one way to do it, is that you can establish James Conner early and often and not have to don't make Trace McSorley make too many plays. And conversely, the Cardinals are 0, and this is the money stat of the year basically. They are 0-9 when their opponent rushes for 100 yards or more. The Bucs have the worst rushing offense in the NFL, averaging about 73 yards a game. And so 74.3 yards per game is what they average per game. And so if, 1, they can run the ball, 2, they keep the Bucs from running the ball like they've done and protect the football, they can win. The problem is, we know that with Trace McSorley or Colt McCoy, that they don't need to respect the pass very much. Even when you've got guys like DeAndre Hopkins and Marquise Brown, they're going to load up on the run, and they're going to force Trace McSorley or Colt McCoy to make plays down the field. They will take away the short game, or they will basically make them dink and dunk until they make a mistake. And they know that the Cardinals defense will break at some point. They've done it all year. They cannot sustain that success through an entire game if they are not in control of the game, and basically one phase of the offense of the opposing offense has been taken out. And so now the interesting thing is that Tom Brady has not beaten the Cardinals since 2004. That's an interesting stat, because in 2008 when the Cardinals played, he was hurt. It was Matt Castle who beat the crap out of him in that December-November game where it snowed. 2012, the Cardinals came away with the win because Stephen Gostkowski missed a game-winning field goal at the end. 2016, the Patriots came to town. Tom Brady was suspended. It was Jimmy Garoppolo, and the Cardinals missed a field goal for that game. Then that's been it. They haven't faced Tom Brady because 2020, when the Cardinals played the Patriots, Tom Brady was on the Bucs, and they have not played the Bucs since Tom Brady joined the team. So, might be the last time we see Tom Brady, in State Farm Stadium for the first one, and unless they go to the playoffs and make it the Super Bowl, then they'll be State Farm Stadium again. But there's no way. Like there's a chance. This is talking like 90s Cardinals. Like, if everything goes right, maybe they can, but no, there's not going to happen. The Bucs are not a great team, but they're a very good defensive team, and they can put together plays. And I think the Cardinals just have too many holes right now, especially with the injuries they're suffering, that it's going to be – I think it'll be another very ugly game. I've got this game looking at 20-12. 20-12. It's going to be a snooze fest. Tampa Bay 20, Cardinals 12 this weekend.
Jess Root is telling you all to take the under. I don't know what the total is, but
I think it's 41.5. I think it's what it's
that seems about right. Yeah, I agree with you. Even if they got everything right in terms of containing Tampa's rush attack and they can get Connor going, just what have they shown at home in the last calendar year? to make you think that they would win this game. And you were going very in detail on paper of these two teams, but I think beyond that, they are very much playing for something. I think everyone likes to think that they're going to run away with the division with that terrible record, and they are.
The Panthers by a game. The Panthers.
Yes, the Panthers are right behind them, and you would think that the Panthers play the Lions this week. You would think Detroit would take care of that one, but I don't know. Steve Wilkes, kudos to him. He's really got them playing hard, and if you're Tampa, you cannot. The Panthers played the Bucs really tough early in the year when they were. Oh, didn't they beat them? The Panthers beat the Bucs, so I'm not sure that you can. They're going to be treating this like a very important game. And I think you have Tom Brady, playoff type game in terms of importance for him. The Panthers did beat the Bucs 21-3 in October. So maybe this is a game you can't drop if you're Tom Brady, because they still play each other again. The Panthers do next week. So I just, you couple the just polar opposite in terms of roster talent available in this game and what this game means to each team. It's going to be an unfortunate one. This was a game that when the schedule came out, or the opponents, me anticipating that the Cardinals would be a wild card or at least
this is going to be a playoff preview.
I was really hoping to go to this game to see Tom Brady play before he hangs him up. That was going to be really important to me. And I kind of got ruined when I found out they were playing on Christmas because I wouldn't be there. But even if I was there and it was next week, or if it was on the 24th, there is absolutely no way I would pay to go to that right now.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the sentiment of a lot of fans.
Yep. And with that, we will wrap up this edition of the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best of Cardinals Talk of the Web. Next week, Seth Cox will be back. We thank Alex for his time. This is Jess Root. That's Alex Sutton. This is the Rise Up C-Red podcast, best of Cardinals Talk of the Web. We will be back next week talking about probably more gross. Anyway, go Cardinals.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up C-Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up Red Sea, be Red Sea Red, and of course, Rise Up Sea Red.
Roll!